Welcome everyone to my channel. This is Dorota Puzio, MyPlanetTV, and my guest is Dr. Derek Farrell. We'll be talking, this is our second interview, and we'll be talking about dreams. Welcome again.
Thank you for having me.
So, dreams is my passion, and dreams is something that I've been interested in for a number of years now, and I've been working with dreams and interpretations of dreams and for a number of years now. But still, I would be very interested on your perspective on dreams in terms of EMDR therapy that you work with, and you've been working with for over 20 years. So, how this EMDR approach looks at dreams? What are dreams in your perspective?
Okay, well, if we look at it in a number of different ways, if a person has a traumatic experience, then sometimes the way in which the brain stores that information, it can have very clear recollections of that traumatic event. Now, because in trauma, what happens is that there's a part of the brain known as the amygdala, which is responsible for the fight, flight, freeze response. Yeah. This gets very activated. It's often stress, it's often engorged with sort of stress hormones, and so it gets very, very hypersensitive. So it gets triggered very, very easily. And what people need to recognize is the fact that it doesn't just get triggered when we are awake. It can also get triggered when we are asleep. And one of the ways in which it shows itself during sleep is in bad dreams and nightmares. And if we look at this from a trauma perspective, this is a very good example of the way in which the brain is trying to digest and process the material. So it's a little bit like an email comes into your inbox. Mm-hmm. You open it, and it's an important email, but you don't know what to do with it. You don't know whether to delete it, you don't know whether to file it or archive it.
Shocking content.
Yeah, and so you close it and you leave it there. And then every time you go onto your email, you see this email is still there, and you're still not sure to deal with it, but you engage in avoidance behavior, and it just keeps staying there. And what often happens when we sleep, it's like that email comes back to the service, and it keeps reminding you about the fact that, well, look, this is not being addressed, and this is not being sort of processed. So from a trauma perspective, dreams can often be fundamentally linked with those trauma experiences, and they can be linked in a number of ways. They can be linked in terms of experiences, that you have dreams and nightmares where you think the accident is happening again or the assault is happening again. It may even be linked by the perpetrator, is that you have this dream, this nightmare of your assailant's face or the perpetrator's face. It may be linked in terms of sounds, like the impact of a collision, or the sound of screaming or screeching of brakes. It can generate a fear response, of sort of a sense of panic, and often people can talk about dreams where they're running, as if they're running for as if their life depended on it, but they don't know what they're running away from. But it can also be somatic. It can also be sort of felt in the body. So often these dreams can be very much linked with people's sort of trauma experiences. The second way is the fact that sometimes the dreams may not feel as if they are directly linked, because they seem more abstract or maybe disconnected or maybe even confusing, in that sense. And often if you deconstruct the nightmare, you can often feel that, no, actually in some way these are connected, because they generate the same fear. They generate the same physical emotion. They generate the same sense of panic. They're often connected with the same sort of type of perpetrator, in that sense. So dreams and nightmares are often, from a trauma perspective, examples of information processing that's not completed. And the brain is trying to digest it. The brain is trying to make sense of the experience. So in EMDR therapy, we don't just have to focus on real events, on real experiences. Sometimes we can focus directly on bad dreams and nightmares, or we can even focus on events that have not happened, but in your mind, it's as if you are afraid that it might happen. So a couple of weeks back, I was doing an EMDR session with a woman who is being diagnosed with clinical depression. And she's been having this recurring dream. And the recurring dream is the fact that she is wandering around a large building searching for her children. And she can't find them. And the more she's searching for them, the more she's becoming distressed, the more she's becoming agitated. Now, she knows that this is just a dream. But when she has the dream, she's very distressed. Just thinking about it, she's very agitated. She has no recollection of the house. The house has no meaning to her. Her children are now young adults, in that sense. But when she thinks about this dream, it makes her feel like she's a bad person. It generates a level of emotionality. It gives a knot in the stomach. It raises a very high level of disturbance. So from EMDR therapy perspective, we process this memory. EMDR therapy is never out to prove whether a memory is real or not. It doesn't matter. It's the fact that the experience generates a level of disturbance. And if it generates a level of disturbance, then we can then process it accordingly.
Yeah, because this is an interesting way of looking at dreams. I always say we sleep 1/3 of our life, we work 1/3 of our life, right? And we live spend the free time 1/3 of our life. So imagine she would be having this dream every day. It's like she's experiencing these emotions 1/3 of her life. Of course, it's an abstract thing to be dreaming the same dream again and again, but it's still, if it happens very often, it's real for her, right?
It is, and that's true. And that's why what's interesting about this case is the fact that this woman had been in analysis for years, but she still kept having the dream. And it wasn't until we actually did some EMDR processing that she was then able to make sense of the experience. She digested it, and actually she stopped having the nightmare after that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, if she stopped it.
Yeah, it because the reason why I think that this is critical goes back to the way in which the brain works.
Yeah.
The brain is what we call a pattern matching organ. An experience comes along, and our brain always tries to make sense of it. Yeah, and so it compares it with what it already knows.
You know what? I always compare brain to the operating system of a computer, let's say. It just works the same. It just looks through if some new, for example, situation happens in our life, our brain will try to compare this situation. If this situation, for example, was shocking or surprising or something new that, surprised us happen, the brain will look for the situations from our previous experience, and it will compare.
That's
right?
Exactly correct.
Like an operational system in the computer.
But sometimes the brain has design faults.
Yes.
And if there are gaps in the information, the brain will make it up. The brain will make an interpretation of it, really. It's like a very good example of this is Chinese whispers. Somebody whispers something into your ear, and you're not totally sure what you say, what the person said, but your brain comes up with a suggestion. I think they said this, and then that then becomes your meaning, you know, in that sense. So you have to remember the brain is being bombarded with thousands of information every second.
You know, there's an interesting example when, for example, there's a car accident and there are witnesses to the accident. Every witness of this accident will say something different happened.
And that's the fascinating thing about memory, is that memory is completely and utterly subjective.
Yes.
You know, you can have 100 people, they can go and watch a film, and they will make sense of
And
that
they will
film
believe
in
it.
completely different ways, and they will believe it.
Yes.
You know, they will.
That was their reality. That's how they perceive.
So we have to look at the brain in two ways. On one level, it's the most remarkable piece of kit. It's
Yes.
incredibly sophisticated a piece of apparatus, but it also has design faults.
Yeah.
It also
So-called
has-
bugs.
Yes, it does. So an example would be, I give you 99 true positive statements, and I give you one half criticism. Which one will you remember this evening?
Yeah. Criticism, because my brain would not be able to process it.
And that's the point. So your brain is often programmed towards things that are emotionally distressing or emotionally uncomfortable. The fact that it ignores 99 statements that are based on truth, veracity, and evidence, that becomes irrelevant. What it focuses on is on that.
That's
is on that
crazy.
negative.
That's really crazy. But that's crazy. But that's true. We tend to forget things that went smoothly in our life, that were fine. We will vividly remember things that were distressful.
Yeah, and that's very, very true. And that's very true. And that's why I think part of treatment is in acknowledging that these are some of the flaws in the operating system. But we can use some of the strengths in the operating system in order to counteract
I love it. I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. Okay, thank you, Dr.
at all.
Farrell. It was really, really a pleasure having you here and be engaged.